want to start out this morning by kind of entering into a space where we would sing and say together that we would let love kind of happen to us this morning. And that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And so whatever you are coming in with this morning, whatever frame of mind you're coming in with, our prayer, our hope is that you would let love enter into who you are. And so before we continue this morning, I want us all to just take a deep breath. I know it's cold outside, and we're all trying to gulp down some coffee. But before we continue, if we could just take a breath together so that we could be here, be present, and be together. If you're new, we especially want to welcome you. We kind of want to orient you to kind of what's happening here at Watershed. And even this morning, we have a website that you can go to and find out more information about what's going on here at Watershed. You can connect with us on social media, or you can download the app that we have. And it's a great way to kind of find out more about what's happening here, or get connected, get plugged into some things, and continue to kind of test the waters here at Watershed. We want to invite you into that. But before we continue, I want to give you a few moments to greet the people around you, and then we can continue singing together.
Tear down the walls I built, tear down the walls I built, every wall I built. 'Cause you deserve every piece of my heart, every piece of my heart, every piece of my heart. Lord, I am trusting that you are a faithful Father, and all that you have, it is good. You're a generous giver, your love's like no other. Won't you come and break through to me over and over and over again? I am bringing my heart to you with open hands, and closer you're drawing me in as the depths of my heart before you again. Lord, I am trusting that you are a faithful Father, and all that you have is good. You're a generous giver, your love's like no other. Won't you come and break through to me over and over and over again? I am bringing my heart to you with open hands. Closer you're drawing me in as the depths of my heart lay before you again. Over and over and over again, I am bringing my heart to you with open hands. Closer you're drawing me in as the depths of my heart lay before you again. Come, tear down the walls I built, every wall I built, every wall I built up. You deserve every piece of my, every piece of my, every piece of my heart. Come, tear down the walls I built, every wall I built, every wall I built up. You deserve every piece of mine, every piece of mine, every piece of my Lord, I am trusting that you are a faithful Father, and all that you have, it is good. You're a generous giver, your love's like no other. Won't you come and break through to me over and over and over again? I am bringing my heart to you with open hands. Closer you're drawing me in as the depths of my heart lay before you again. Over and over and over Tear down the walls I built, every wall I built, every wall I built. 'Cause you deserve every piece of every piece of every piece of my heart.
God, this morning as we walk into this room and we try to be present, we try to be here, God, I pray that the walls that are built up because we are present, I pray that those walls will just be seen this morning. That we could slow down enough to see where the walls are. God, to be here, to be present, is to bring the things in with us that are walls, keeping us from ourselves and keeping us from seeing the people around us. And so this morning, pray that we could just slow down. And God, with each breath, may we be reminded of the gift of newness, the gift of being here, the gift of being with other people who are different than us. May that gift allow us to be here. We love you, God. We love each other. Pray all this in your name.
Good morning. My name's Scott. I'm one of the pastors here, and maybe this morning for you is a little bit of a release valve where the week has been kind of crazy and you just feel like there's a space that you need to be where you and God can connect, because I know that's some of the stories of what you are living with as I talked with some of you as you came in this morning. Or maybe this is just, it's been a really good week and this is just a way to kind of kickstart going into this next week. However you're coming to this morning, thank you for being with us. We're really especially grateful. If you are a guest or if one of our visitors that you are here, we talk often of this experience called Preface. One of our current prefaces right now, you can see some pictures of what's going on in the room right now. We've got a whole group of folks in there. And when we get together like this for 6 nights, for 6 nights, and we discuss some of the kind of the inner workings of who we are as a community, who Watershed is. We talk about some of the things in terms of what it means for you to kind of go to next levels. You get to connect with a lot of people. So a lot of the folks in this room are relatively new to the space here. And so they're asking some really good questions about what does it mean for them to re-engage. And then actually some of them are going to continue on as a small group. And so the Preface experience has some really neat legs to it. It's a powerful experience. We highly recommend it. We do it 5 times a year. And if you are interested in being a part of Preface going forward, I know we have our next one starting in January, and it fills up pretty quickly, so we'd love to have you download the Watershed app. You can sign up through that, or at last call on the way out. We'd love to be able to help you with that. We've got on the 8th, and we do this twice a year. We call this event, we call it Subterranean, and it starts at 5:30, so the game goes to 4:30 or so, 4:25, somewhere in there. Show up after the game, come on over here. We'll have dinner for everybody. We have childcare. We'll feed your children as well. And from about 5:30 to about 7:15 or so, we get to spend time as a group of folks who get to talk about things that sometimes we don't get to talk about on a Sunday morning. This is where we get to talk about some of the more detailed nuances of what's happening here at Watershed. This next Subterranean, which we happen to have on the 8th, is going to be talking more about where we feel like Spirit and God is taking us in terms of what 2020 looks like. And so really excited about some of the work and some of the language and some of the narrative that we've been working on the last 4 or 5 months as a lead team, as a staff. We've had a chance to meet with some of you all and kind of speak into that. So really excited about what's happening there. So last week I stood up and I invited you to be a part of our next Christmas event. Every year or so we try to figure out how can we kind of keep the focus of what's happening at Christmas time, not only maybe in-house in terms of community, but what's it mean to look outside of what's happening here at Watershed. And so we've partnered with Foster Village of Charlotte and Elon Home, and they do some great work in terms of the fostering space here in the city. Elon sort of aligned you with a child, and Foster Village of Charlotte helps you in terms of the back end in providing resources and some of the needs for the family. And so Elon came to us a few months ago and said, would you be interested in hosting a Christmas party for our families? And so we said, absolutely. So we've got an event coming up here in the next several weeks. This room will be packed with the families and the foster children that are a part of the system. And they also said, could you provide some gifts for us? And we said, well, sure, of course we could do that. That shouldn't be a big deal. And so they gave us a very detailed list. I stood up last week and said, would you all jump in on this? And before the service was over, it was lighting up. You guys were buying these, or sort of aligning yourself with these gifts like crazy. Monday morning, we had people delivering stuff to the staff house already. It was awesome. And I think we only have like a dozen or so names left on the list. We may only need another 20 or so gift cards. And so basically what we're asking for is this. If you go to a Watershed app and you click on Fostering Christmas, you'll be able to go through a list, and you'll literally be able to see a child with a name and an age and a specific request that that child is asking for. Some of the kids are asking for like anything dinosaur or a football or a basketball. These kids are just looking for something that, of course, any of our children would hope and expect for. So we're inviting you to be a part of this experience. And if you would, the hope would be that you spend somewhere between $25 and $40 for each of the gifts. We try to keep it in that range, nothing higher, nothing lower, so that everybody is sort of having a shared experience that evening. These gifts are not only going to the foster children, but also to the biological children in the household, who also, in a sense, sacrificed for this experience. And so we want this whole evening to be just layered with generosity. And so we've got this happening over the next couple of weeks, and we're going to invite you to start bringing those gifts in. And it's real simple. Wrap the gift, put the child's name on the gift, put the specific details of what is in that gift as a separate, sort of like a sticky note on there. And you can leave that in the side room as you come in those doors to the right. And like I said, I think we only have another 20 or 30 names left on that. If there's any way we could knock it out this morning, that would be awesome. And if some of you, every year we have some of you come around and say, you know what, listen, I'm your last bastion of hope in that process. If there's 10 or 12 kids that don't have something, we run out of people who are willing to donate, I'm in for that. So please let me know if that's something you'd be interested in doing. You're also welcome to be a part of that evening. I've not heard differently because I was gone this week. So last I heard, we were still in need of a DJ for that evening. So I know we have a lot of DJs in here this morning. They apparently needed somebody for a Santa. I know we got plenty of Santas in here this morning. And then some that want to serve that evening to those families. And so all that information is if you go to the Fosterville of Charlotte, or the Fostering Christmas section, click on how you want to volunteer or how you want to give. It's all very, very clear and very defined there. And so when we talk about generosity here, these are the kinds of things that we get to do as a community. And frankly, it's been it's been a challenging year for us in terms of generosity. We've never been known as a large, wealthy church, so things have always been snug and tight. But for us, it's really important that the work that we get to do, we get to keep focused outward. That while, sure, it's important that we make things happen in terms of what's going on in the space here and the good work that's happening here, the space over in Greenhouse, what's going on with your kids, the space of what's happening in homes throughout the week as we have small groups, which I haven't even had a chance to talk about those, but if you're not connected to a small group here, to a block, we highly invite you to and recommend you to be a part of that experience. We've got so many things that are happening, and it happens because many of you give hours a week and hundreds of dollars a month each to see what's happening here. And so we kind of invite you in to continue to move forward in that. Maybe you're looking at year-end giving. We'd love to be an outlet for you in that space as well. Our hope is to raise seven households a month that say, listen, I'm new in terms of my recurring giving, and we'd love to have you be a part of that. You can see we're a little behind this month, and so it's been a tight year. But we believe the work that we're doing is really meaningful. I want to continue to invite you into that and inspire you towards it, not guilt you into it, but inspire you towards it. So thank you for being here, and I look forward to the moments ahead.
Every day I wake and everything
I do. Yeah, it's either you send me crying, if I'm not even trying to make the change I wanna see. I can't sit and hope, I can't just sit and pray. I can't find the love, all I see is pain. Through the pain, say that I believe. I can't just breathe,
Good morning. My name is Liz Rougeau, and my husband Dave and I have been going to Watershed for about 7 years now. I volunteer in greenhouse. I've worked in the 3-year-old room, and now I volunteer in the infant room. I've also been a member in and out of the Her Grow block. So what's saving me now? First, I'd like to tell you a little bit about my daily life. I wake and leave for work very early in the morning. I have twin daughters, Natalie and Sarah, that I don't see in the mornings. And my husband is just waking up by the time I'm out the door. A lot of mornings I wake already dreaming of the moment I get to put my head back on the pillow. My cup of coffee, a Pop-Tart, along with the Spider-Man soundtrack, help get me through the drive on my way to work. I get to my school and begin the day that it's never complete and usually overwhelming. I work as a school counselor in a Title I elementary school in Charlotte, where the mental health needs are always too many, where my team and the resources available are never enough, and where the traumatic events our children experience keep piling up. There's never enough time in the day. I'm never enough. Yet these children and families are depending on me. But what about my own family? Lately, I'm always leaving work later than I want. By the time I get to the girls, it's already getting dark. The running to-do list never leaves my head. From work to home, it's always there. I'm always looking forward. As I pick up the girls, I'm thinking ahead to dinner. As I make dinner, I'm thinking ahead to bath time, then reading time and bedtime. I'd like to shout out my husband here because lately the to-do list from school has just overflowed into home, and he takes the lead on a lot of the evening activities. By the time we're all in bed, I'm exhausted, my husband's exhausted, our dog hasn't been walked, the house absolutely never gets cleaned, our relationship gets neglected, and we crash in our own places to unwind before falling asleep. And we get to start all over the next day. By the time the day is done, I've wished it all away by looking too far ahead on the to-do list. But every once in a while, on the days where I'm in a place of discontent or feeling myself longing for the grass on the other side, I see it, a tiny soap bubble. Of course, I'm washing dishes at the time, and I just watch it for a minute. A long minute while I soak it in. It's as if this tiny bubble floating around me is teaching me a lesson and giving myself grace and allowing myself to slow down and to find the joy in the smallest moments. Everything I'm longing for is actually right in front of me. I read a book 10 years ago called 1,000 Gifts, A Dare to Live Fully Right Where You Are. This book was life-changing for me then, before marriage and before children and before I was deep in my career. But it's been even more life-changing now. Ann Voskamp challenges her readers to write down 1,000 gifts in everyday life. Not big gifts like children or husbands or the privilege I was born with, but smaller gifts like a soap bubble. Giving thanks for these small delights allows me more time to enjoy and give thanks for the bigger things, like my family, my career, my friends, and my day-to-day. Suddenly, my gratitude list is way longer than my to-do list. I realize that through giving myself grace and weighing down the small moments with my thanks, that I gain the time I need to realize the larger joys that are actually dominating my life. This leaves me wanting to wake up and live fully each day, not wishing for my bed the minute I wake, but wondering what new opportunities the day will bring. And that's what's saving me now as I live through the ordinary, everyday life of wake, work, family, sleep, repeat. A slow-moving soap bubble. And now we'd like to give you the space and time to reflect for a few minutes on what's saving you right now. Where might God and the divine be showing up in the cracks and details and routines of your life?
Good morning. My name is Matt. I'm one of the co-pastors here. I was standing just beyond that curtain watching the intro to this series, and Kate Montz came up and tapped me on the shoulder, and I literally jumped out of my skin. It was such a creepy sounding music, wasn't it? So let me start this morning. I want to show you a picture of a hotel here in Charlotte, the Dunhill in Uptown. Maybe you're familiar with this hotel, but this hotel was built in 1929. Around the period of the Great Depression, and when it was built, it was the largest, the tallest building in Charlotte. And according to hauntedrooms.com, it is number one in a list of top 10 haunted spaces here in Charlotte. And staff there just insist that there's a kind of this creepy presence that you can feel when you're in various parts of this building. Room 906 specifically has had reports of something tapping on the nightstand and devices turning on and turning off. And the rumor is, or one of the theories behind why it might be haunted is because this building has this really tragic history of being, because it was the tallest building in Charlotte during the Great Depression, that people would unfortunately use this building as a way of kind of dealing with the trauma of loss, or the trauma of having lost everything and their life kind of coming to an end. And so it's got this real kind of sad, tragic history associated with it. If you were here the first week of this series, you might remember me suggesting that I have like this, I don't know, maybe a healthy skepticism towards the paranormal. But I'd be lying if I told you that I didn't get creeped out, obviously, at times, especially, ironically, in this space. It's kind of this space is kind of old, it's kind of vintage. But what makes it worse is late at night, when I'm here by myself wrapping up, realizing that there's like this boiler room that sits right below this thing with this rusty old boiler and all of these old rusty pipes and cobwebs, and it's a little dank and dark. It's like every boiler room in every scary movie that you've ever seen. And so when I'm here by myself, sometimes I get a little creeped out. I remember the first night that I ever closed up shop here, so to speak. It was after Preface. I was standing right on the other side of those double doors, getting ready to walk down the hall and kind of call it a night. And out of Greenhouse, one of those battery-operated toys just randomly went off. And was like there was this siren-type noise. And I just remember thinking, this is silly. Like, why do people allow their imaginations to run away, for their imaginations to run away? And I'm having this thought as I'm literally sprinting towards the door to get out of here as quickly as possible. And the reason I'm telling you this story is because I made a commitment in this series that every time I talked, I was going to start with a ghost story. That's really the only reason I'm telling you this. There's no big takeaway from this. If you were here the first weekend, you probably, or maybe you remember me describing that this series was born out of actually a book called The Idolatry of God. And Peter Rollins in The Idolatry of God writes that we're all haunted by something. He says we're all haunted houses. We're all full of ghosts, every one of us. And it's not like in the movies where the ghosts are here because they can't let go of the world. The ghosts aren't there because they can't let go of us. They're there because we can't let go of them. And so over the last several weeks, we've been talking about some things that maybe could be haunting for you or for us. Everything from like the gap that we experience when we're first born, or rejection or failure, or some of the masks that we insist on wearing. This morning, I want to try to talk a little bit about an emotion that I think haunts us maybe more than we recognize. And the way I want to get into this is to take a look at a few different moments in the scriptures when Jesus becomes emotive. And the first one being in the Gospel of John. Maybe you're familiar with this story, but Jesus had this group of friends, and within kind of his inner circle, there were these two sisters, Mary and Martha, and they had a brother named Lazarus. And the story goes that Jesus he's out about doing the work that he's doing. He's preaching, he's demonstrating the kingdom at some level through some sort of action or miracle. And he gets word that Lazarus is sick and that Lazarus is dying. And the sisters are begging for Jesus to show up and make a difference. And so at some point, he finally makes his way back to the village, but it's too late. Lazarus has already passed. And it says, as they're entering the village, he sees Mary weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping. And it says he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. And then it says Jesus wept. He just broke down and cried. So that's the first account. Jesus weeping over the loss of a friend. Jesus joining in the sadness of his friend's loss. The second story is one where Jesus is entering Jerusalem for what would end up being his last time. And in this story, this is in the aftermath of 2 years of really hard work, where he's been spending a ton of time attempting to demonstrate and announce God's kingdom, a reality that lives antithetical to the way the world worked back then and arguably today. And he spends all this time attempting to confront and undermine corrupt and abusive forms of power. And he's doing this first with his own people, the leaders of Israel, but then also he's including the larger context of the Empire of Rome. And by the time he gets to Jerusalem, it's almost as though he recognizes that his efforts will not have been enough. And that there's this future, not just within his life, but then also the larger context of the future generations of Israel, where this is not going to go well. He senses Rome's willingness to just annihilate anyone that gets in their way, Israel being included. And eventually this actually happens. In 70 AD in Jerusalem, a general by the name of Titus and an emperor by the name of Vespasian go into Jerusalem after this revolt, this uprising from some of the Jewish zealots of that time, and they just level the streets. They literally kill thousands of people, and they demolish all the temples in Jerusalem. And so Jesus sensing a future of this nature, walks into Jerusalem. And in Luke 19, it says, as he approaches the city, he weeps over it. And he says, if you, even you, like you're the religious community, you should know better. If only you had known on this day what would bring you peace. But now it's hidden from your eyes. It's like, it's just too late. And so if you're keeping score, Jesus weeping over his friends, Jesus weeping over the state of affairs for his people in the world. And then finally, in the book of Mark, Mark describes this intense, emotive experience of Jesus dealing with his impending future. And this future of being arrested, falsely accused, convicted in a kangaroo court, and eventually executed by the state. It says when he's in this garden called Gethsemane, he's with his disciples. He tells them, sit there while I pray. And he took Peter, James, and John along with him, and he began to be deeply distressed and troubled. My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. My soul is drenched in sadness, and I don't know what to do. So you have Jesus weeping with his friends. You have Jesus weeping over the state of affairs, and you have Jesus weeping over his own life. Really, it's like you see these three images or these three snapshots of Jesus modeling particular types of sadness. With his friends, he's modeling a communal type of sadness. In other words, he's embracing the emotion that his friends are experiencing. Losing Lazarus, that would have been a personal event for Jesus, but we also know later that Jesus heals Lazarus. So that you have to think that was in the back of his mind. But his tears then have to be more about identifying with the pain of his friends. Their sadness becomes his sadness. Their grief, their mourning, their loss become his grief, mourning, and loss. And so this first story, there's like this communal sadness within the context of these friendships where there's this transmission of felt experiences within the context of their day. And in the second story, we see a type of sadness that I think we could call political sadness. Now, when you and I hear the term political, it's really easy to think partisan or party or conservative or liberal or Democrat or Republican. But that's really not what I'm attempting to name here. And certainly those contexts weren't even in place in Jesus' days. But it's this idea of something being political, almost like at a baseline level, of it having to do with how societies or groups choose to create order or harmony for its citizens and its people. And so you can't talk about politics without talking about structure or systems or power. You can't talk about politics also without acknowledging that politics isn't necessarily bad. In fact, politics are actually good and helpful in so much as they promote a type of human flourishing for everyone. But within the politics of Jesus' day, the way that societies and organize themselves usually only allowed for a certain group to flourish, and often at the expense of another group, which I know has zero relevance for today, right? But if you look closely, you can hear this political sadness in Jesus' voice. If you, even you, had only known on this day the way of organizing yourself, the way of seeing the world that would actually bring you peace. This is a political moment for Jesus, and your structure, Israel, your system, is eventually not only going to continue to oppress your own people, but it's going to lead to your demise, which again, it eventually does. And so there's this sadness that we observe, but it's a sadness, a political sadness in Jesus that's actually, interestingly enough, situated in the aftermath of 2 years of incredible effort and energy towards helping make a difference, to help make a change. And so it's sadness, but it's in the aftermath of grabbing a whip and clearing out the temple, or speaking truth to the power brokers of his day again and again and again, or standing in between an angry mob and a woman who had been caught in adultery. It's sadness in the aftermath of subverting the empire and Israel's leadership through metaphor and parables and miracles. It's in the aftermath of solidarity with the marginalized or the least of these. It's in the aftermath of responding to violence, the go-to tactic of the empires of that day with nonviolence and creativity. It's also in the aftermath of self-sacrifice versus self-preservation, right? Self-sacrifice that's essential in the work of equality and justice and peace, to the point that eventually that sacrifice ends up meaning his execution by the state. And so Jesus is sad, but it's this sadness that's drawn from this deep, sort of painful well of justice and liberation within the politics of his day. And this too, this is interesting. I was thinking about this past week. In Luke chapter 19, there's this interesting interaction where Jesus ends up in a conversation with one of Israel's up-and-coming, elite, wealthy leaders, the rich young rulers, how it's framed in the Gospels. And he asks this really haunting question: what must I do to inherit the kingdom of heaven? Or what must I do to inherit eternal life, is how it's framed in other Gospels. And this man isn't asking about some sort of future beyond this lifetime. He's wanting to know, how do I organize my life so that it lives in symphony with the concerns and the pursuits of God? And what does it mean to have the very best life possible now? Which is an interesting question for a guy that's rich and full of power and wealth. And Jesus says, oh, well, you're not asking a question about obedience then. You're asking a question about essence. And so he says, sell everything you own. Sell everything. And give those proceeds, or give that stuff, to the poor. And when this happens, it's really interesting, because reading these two stories together, there's two types of sadness that start to confront our life. And it's a sadness that shows Jesus approaching Jerusalem for the last time. And then this sadness of the rich young ruler who is walking away sad for different reasons. And this choice starts to emerge for us when you read the two stories together. What sort of sadness will mark your life? Will it be born out of the self-sacrificing work of justice and liberation for others? Liberation that ultimately, in the long run, is not just for the oppressed, but for the oppressor. Right? Can we acknowledge that Jesus is offering this man freedom as well? And this man is held hostage to his position in the world, his power, his privilege. And this power and privilege even perpetuates the suffering of others, his own tribe at one level. And so the thing that he's living out is really not freedom to begin with. And so what sort of sadness marks our life? Is it sadness born out of this work of liberation and justice, or is it a sadness that has us walking away, kind of doubling down, rationalizing whatever our place is in the world so tight, we're gripping it so tight that we think that it is everything that defines us, or that we can't live without it. So you have a communal sense of sadness. You have a political sadness. And then there's this personal sadness of Jesus. And I was thinking how, trying to give this language this last week, and I don't think I have to spend a lot of time talking about personal sadness, because I think because we all have firsthand experience in this type of sadness, maybe it's not so necessary. But as Jesus sensed the pain and suffering that awaited him in his last hours, he became overwhelmed with a deep form of personal sadness. Personal because it wasn't something he could share, and personal because it wasn't something anyone could take from him. And apparently, it wasn't something that God could take from him, or was willing to take from him. I think most of us do whatever we can to avoid sadness. There's a couple of, I guess it was a year or so ago, my wife and I, we heard about this movie that had been released called Lion. Maybe you're familiar with this movie, but it's about this little boy from India who gets separated from his brother at a train station. And he never finds his way home. He ends up walking the streets, ends up in an orphanage, and then ends up being adopted by this white family from Australia. And so Donna and I are thinking, that sounds familiar. We have a daughter that's adopted from India, a son from Thailand, and another son from Ethiopia, who just happened to have been adopted around the same age as the main character in this story. So we thought, we need to go see this. This could really be inspiring. It could be life-giving to our family. And so, Umbrella of Grace, we bought a bottle of wine, and we snuck it into the theater, and we went all the way up to the top row in Park Road Theater, and was hiding it in Donna's huge, big honking purse, and we never opened it. We never opened the bottle, because from the opening scene to the close of the movie, we were ugly crying. I mean, it was embarrassing. Like, thank God there was only a few people in the theater.